You have been carrying a heavy kind of confusion for a long time. It is the kind that sits quietly in your chest, the kind that makes you question your own memory, your own judgment, your own worth. You probably remember moments where everything felt perfectly fine, followed by sudden shifts that left you scrambling to understand what changed. You tried to be more patient. You tried to communicate better. You adjusted your tone, your timing, your expectations. You gave more, explained more, stayed longer. And still, the ground kept moving. You are exhausted because you have been trying to solve a puzzle that was never meant to make sense to you. The fatigue you feel is not a sign of weakness. It is the natural result of spending months or years in an environment where clarity was consistently replaced with contradiction. You were not the problem. The situation you were in was built on an imbalance that required your constant adaptation, while the other person remained fixed in a pattern of control and self-protection. What you experienced was not a failure on your part. It was the slow erosion of reality through repeated, subtle inconsistencies. There is a psychological truth that becomes very clear once you step back from the emotional noise. People who rely on manipulation and emotional imbalance rarely announce their intentions. They do not need to. Their methods reveal themselves through behavior, through timing, through the small cracks that appear when their carefully managed image meets real life. You have likely noticed these cracks before. Maybe you dismissed them as stress, or a bad day, or your own oversensitivity. But they were not random. They were patterns. When someone operates from a place of deep insecurity masked by superiority, their behavior will inevitably contradict their words. The mind cannot sustain a false image forever. Eventually, the pressure of maintaining that image creates leaks. Those leaks are how they accidentally expose themselves. The signs are always there, but they are designed to be overlooked. Understanding this does not require complex theory. It only requires paying attention to what is actually happening, rather than what you are being told is happening. The first and most consistent sign is the gap between what is promised and what is delivered. You have probably heard grand statements about commitment, loyalty, or deep understanding. You have heard apologies that sounded perfectly crafted, complete with promises to change, to listen better, to do things differently. Then, within days or weeks, the exact same pattern returned. This is not accidental forgetfulness. It is a structural feature of how someone with this dynamic operates. The promises are not meant to guide behavior. They are meant to restore calm, reset your expectations, and buy time. The psychology behind this is straightforward. When the person feels the relationship slipping, or when their actions are questioned, the immediate goal is to regain stability and control. Apologies and promises are tools to achieve that stability, not commitments to internal change. The effect on you is predictable. You begin to live in a cycle of hope and disappointment. You start measuring your worth by whether they follow through. You wait for the proof that never arrives. Over time, your nervous system learns to brace for the letdown, even while your mind hopes for the breakthrough. This gap between words and actions is not a reflection of your ability to love or understand. It is a reflection of a system that values image over integrity. Recognizing this gap does not mean you stop believing people can change. It means you stop accepting promises as proof. Proof is shown through consistent behavior over time, not through carefully timed reassurances. Another consistent pattern is the way blame is redirected. In a healthy dynamic, when a conflict arises, both people look at their own contribution. In the dynamic you experienced, the moment tension appeared, the focus shifted away from the person causing it and landed squarely on you. You were accused of being too sensitive, too demanding, too critical, or too emotional. You found yourself defending your tone instead of addressing the original issue, You explained yourself repeatedly, hoping that if you just found the right words, they would finally see the truth. This is projection, and it is a well-documented psychological defense. When someone cannot tolerate their own discomfort, shame, or responsibility, they externalize it. They place it onto the person closest to them. It is much easier to convince themselves that you are the problem than to sit with the reality that their behavior is causing harm. The effect on you is deeply destabilizing. You begin to internalize accusations that do not belong to you. You start editing your personality to avoid triggering conflict. You monitor your reactions more than their actions. Your emotional energy is consumed by self-doubt instead of self-respect. This is not a partnership. It is a one-sided emotional labor system designed to keep you off balance. When you realize that blame shifting is a mechanism of self-protection rather than a response to your actual behavior, the confusion begins to lift. You stop trying to prove your innocence and start recognizing the pattern. You see that the accusations are not about you. They are about their inability to face themselves. The third area where they consistently reveal themselves is in their reaction to boundaries. A boundary is simply a statement of what you will and will not accept. It is not a punishment. It is not an attack. It is a basic requirement for healthy connection. Yet, in your experience, setting even a small limit often triggered a disproportionate response. You might have noticed sudden coldness, passive aggression, guilt trips, or an escalation of conflict. You were made to feel selfish, unreasonable, or ungrateful for protecting your own well-being. This reaction exposes a fundamental truth about the dynamic. Boundaries threaten control. When someone relies on emotional imbalance to maintain their sense of stability, any limit you set is perceived as a loss of influence. If your compliance is the foundation of their comfort, your independence feels like a rejection. Their response is not about your boundary being unfair. It is about their dependency on your availability. The effect on you is a slow erosion of self-trust. You learn to anticipate the backlash before you even speak your needs. You silence yourself to keep the peace. You convince yourself that your limits are too rigid, that you are asking for too much, that you should be more flexible. This is not flexibility. This is self-abandonment. When you observe this pattern clearly, you realize that a healthy person does not punish you for having limits. A healthy person respects them, even if they need time to adjust. The intensity of their reaction to your boundaries is not a measure of your wrongdoing. It is a measure of how much the dynamic depended on your silence. Stepping back from this does not require anger. It only requires observation. You begin to see that their discomfort with your boundaries is their responsibility, not yours. Another revealing pattern is the inconsistency in empathy. You have likely experienced moments of intense warmth, followed by sudden withdrawal. You were shown care when it was convenient, when it served their image, or when they needed something from you. But when you were struggling, when you needed steady support without conditions, the empathy vanished. It was replaced with indifference, impatience, or a subtle message that your emotions were an inconvenience. This selective empathy is not a character flaw you failed to understand. It is a functional approach to connection. For someone operating from this dynamic, empathy is not a consistent capacity. It is a tool. It is used when it maintains the relationship, restores their image, or secures your compliance. When empathy is no longer useful, it is turned off. The psychological mechanism behind this is emotional compartmentalization. They do not struggle to understand feelings. They struggle to tolerate feelings that require them to take responsibility or adjust their behavior. The impact on you is a deep sense of emotional whiplash. You start doubting your own needs. You wonder if you are too demanding, too needy, too difficult. You begin to measure your worth by how much you can endure without asking for support. This is not how connection is supposed to work. Genuine empathy does not switch on and off based on convenience. It remains steady, especially during difficult moments. When you recognize that their warmth was conditional, you stop internalizing the coldness. You stop believing that you failed to earn their care. You see that the inconsistency was never about your value. It was about their limited capacity for genuine connection. Accepting this reality is painful at first, but it is also liberating. It frees you from the exhausting cycle of trying to prove that you deserve consistent kindness. As these patterns become clear, something shifts inside you. The fog begins to lift. You stop searching for hidden meanings in their words and start paying attention to the actual results of their actions. You realize that confusion is not a sign of your failure to understand. It is a sign that you were placed in a situation designed to keep you questioning. Recognition does not come from overthinking. It comes from stepping back emotionally and allowing yourself to see the full picture instead of isolated moments. You begin to notice how your energy changes when you are around them. You notice the tension in your body before a conversation even starts. You notice how quickly you justify their behavior to yourself. These are not signs that you are broken. They are signals that your nervous system has been trying to protect you from a pattern it could not logically explain. Clarity arrives when you stop trying to fix the dynamic and start observing it. You stop asking what you could have done differently. You start asking what the pattern actually shows you. This shift is quiet but powerful. It does not require confrontation. It does not require dramatic revelations. It only requires honesty. You allow yourself to see that the inconsistency, the projection, the boundary pushback, the conditional empathy were never random. They were connected. They formed a system that kept you emotionally invested while keeping them emotionally protected. Once you see the system, your relationship to it changes. You no longer need to prove your reality to someone who benefits from your doubt. You begin to practice calm detachment. Detachment does not mean becoming cold or indifferent. It means removing your emotional survival from their behavior. It means recognizing that their actions are information, not verdicts on your worth. You stop chasing closure from the person who created the confusion. You start generating closure within yourself by trusting your own perception again. This is where boundaries become natural instead of forced. You no longer set limits to teach them a lesson or to change their behavior. You set limits because you respect yourself. You protect your time, your energy, your peace. You respond instead of reacting. You speak clearly instead of over-explaining. You allow silence to do the work that arguments used to do. Calm detachment is not a strategy to win. It is a practice of self-preservation. It removes the fuel from the cycle. When you stop participating in the emotional imbalance, the dynamic loses its power. You begin to reclaim your own reality. You remember what it feels like to make a decision without anticipating backlash. You remember what it feels like to express a need without preparing for guilt. You remember that your worth was never tied to your ability to endure inconsistency. Healing begins when you stop trying to understand them and start tending to yourself. The exhaustion you carried was real. The confusion was real. The emotional toll was real. But so is your capacity to recover. Recovery does not happen overnight. It happens in quiet moments when you choose to trust your memory instead of doubting it. It happens when you allow yourself to feel anger without guilt, sadness without shame, relief without apology. It happens when you stop measuring your progress by how well you handle their presence and start measuring it by how well you honor your own absence from their drama. You rebuild your sense of reality by surrounding yourself with consistency. You seek out relationships where words match actions, where boundaries are respected, where empathy is steady. You learn to recognize calm as a baseline, not a rare event. You stop normalizing chaos. You stop romanticizing intensity. You understand that peace is not boring. It is the foundation of a life you can actually live in. The signs were always there, because patterns do not hide. They reveal themselves through repetition. You noticed them because you were paying attention, even when you were told not to trust your attention. You felt the inconsistency because your mind and body were designed to detect imbalance. You questioned yourself because you were taught to doubt your own clarity. None of that diminishes your strength. It proves it. You survived a situation that required you to abandon your own perception in order to stay connected. Now you are choosing perception over connection. You are choosing clarity over comfort. You are choosing yourself. That is not a rejection of love. It is a return to it. Real love does not require you to shrink. Real connection does not demand confusion. Real respect does not fluctuate based on convenience. When you internalize this, the weight begins to lift. You stop carrying the burden of explaining yourself to people who never intended to understand. You stop waiting for apologies that were never meant to change behavior. You stop measuring your worth by how much you can endure. You start living from a place of quiet certainty. You know what you will accept. You know what you will walk away from. You know that your peace is non-negotiable. Moving forward does not require you to forget what happened. It requires you to stop letting it dictate your future. You take the lessons without carrying the pain. You recognize the patterns without repeating them. You protect your energy without becoming guarded. You open your life to consistency, to honesty, to relationships that do not demand proof of your worth. You breathe easier. You think clearer. You trust yourself again. The confusion fades because you are no longer looking for answers in the wrong place. You are building them within yourself. And that is where healing truly begins. You were never the problem. You were simply caught in a pattern that required your silence to survive. Now that you see it, you no longer have to participate. You can step back. You can breathe. You can move forward with quiet strength, clear boundaries, and the steady certainty that your reality matters. Your peace is yours to protect, and your future belongs to you.